The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. Stop wasting time. Thank you all for attending. Hope you're all healthy and happy and sitting a safe distance from anybody else. Like I said, let's get on with our webinar this morning. Stop wasting time. Hold more productive meetings. My name's Chris Fitzsimmons. I'm a member of the product marketing team here at BIAMP. I have responsibility for our conferencing solutions, so that is going to be the focus of conversation this morning, conferencing. I've been in the product group at BIAMP. I'm now in the marketing group. I have a lot of experience of our products, so if you have any questions about the things that come up today, about the topic in general, please feel free to answer them. Use the questions facility inside GoToWebinar, please. That means that we can keep track of everybody who asked what. This meeting is being recorded, and a copy of that recording will be made available to you guys all after the session finishes via an email. And actually, a copy of the webinar will be on YouTube as well, probably in a few days' time. So there's multiple ways to get hold of this and to share it if you find it useful. If you want to share it with colleagues or wherever, please feel free to do so. So let's crack on. A few things we're going to cover this morning. And before that, just a little background to this topic. So this is not primarily a product webinar. This is hopefully to give you some food for thought and some useful information to have conversations with your customers, with your colleagues, with your peers when talking about productivity, when talking about meetings. We are going to go through a bit of research. This webinar was born a couple of months ago now when I started looking at people's opinions of meetings and how they go and how productive they are and how they can use of time. What are the things that trip up meetings and prevent them from being as successful as possible? There's quite a lot of research out there about meetings and meeting effectiveness, so I poke a little bit through that. I'll share that with you. I hope you find it to be revealing. Then, of course, there's some tips on the meat of this webinar, which is how to stop wasting time, how to have productive meetings. How can we as attendees and meeting hosts and technology specialists facilitate our respective organizations in having better meetings? That's not just about end users in air quotes. It could be, if you're an integrator, it could be at your company, consultant, could be in your meetings with colleagues. At BIAMP, there are things we can do better to have better meetings and make better use of our time. Obviously, there are some solutions from BIAMP. I want to talk about one in particular, a new offering from BIAMP that recently came to the company. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that at the end. And obviously there's space for questions. So if you have questions, use the questions box. In general, I'll probably hold them to the end, but if there's something obviously pertinent to the topic I'm in at hand, someone's misunderstood something, please use the questions box and I will address it at once. So how many meetings do we have? It's important, right? We spend a large amount of time in meetings as professionals these days. And actually the numbers collated from around the various pieces of research out there suggest that somewhere around 40 to 50 million meetings take place every day in the USA. And that translates into 188 million individual meeting experiences. Well, what's a meeting experience? A meeting experience is a bit like a person hour. One person in one meeting is a meeting experience. And the reason I use the word experience is that it has the opportunity to be good or bad. You can have a good experience, you can have a bad experience. Every time one of these 188 million meeting experiences occurs, there's an opportunity for it to go well and be productive, or it could go less well. It could be an unproductive experience. So it's kind of like rolling a dice. Every time you roll the dice, there's a chance of something going good or something going bad, and that's why it's important that we pay attention to how these meeting experiences work. You'll notice some numbers after these statistics. That's because at the end of the slide deck, which will also be distributed to attendees, the references that I found this data from are called out too. So if you want to go back and look at my source material, it's all available online, and you can see that in the final slide. So this 188 million individual meeting experiences, at one point, translated into 163 billion minutes on conference calls in the US and the UK. That number's probably a lot larger by now, given the situation we're in at the moment, given the amount of homework that's going on, the amount of remote work that's going on. I really have no idea what that figure is now, but it's obviously much larger. It might even have a zero on the end. We might be talking about trillions of meetings, minutes and conference calls. Now, either way, it's getting more and more important. But how good are those experiences? Are they any good? What you find fairly quickly if you start searching the internet for insight or opinion on this topic is that the popularly held view is that meetings in general are, in air quotes, a bad thing for a number of reasons. There's a particularly well oft used statistic that something like 50% of meetings are unproductive. There are blog posts, articles, infographics in some quite high profile publications about how bad meetings are. But what you find as you dig a little bit deeper and you start looking at the research or lack of it behind these statistics is that this all comes from one or two sources. And most of those articles are published by or on behalf of companies that make meeting solutions. So people who have an interest in you looking for new solutions to make your meetings better are publishing a statistic that says your meetings are bad. So is it true? Are 50% of meetings unproductive? Well, it actually doesn't appear that way. Verizon did an excellent and very detailed piece of research about 10 years ago, which suggested that, in fact, 66% of meetings are actually pretty productive. They're either extremely or very productive. Meeting attendees felt satisfied. And this isn't just of Verizon's employees. They did a fairly extensive piece of research in the United States to kind of poke around at the issues on inside meetings. And they really only found that 7% of people found that their meetings were either not productive or not at all productive. So, pretty good. So why does that 50% out there? The real reason is that the way that the research has been written is pejorative. If you ask someone a question such as, how bad was your lunch? Your range of available answers is pretty limited, especially when it's a multiple choice question, right? So you go from bad to terrible to worst lunch ever. You don't get the opportunity to say, well, actually my lunch was pretty good. And that's what's going on in a lot of these other research is that they're set up to provide an outcome for the person who is doing the research because that person who's doing the research has an agenda. And that's not just true of conferencing research, that's true of lots of statistics we see all over the place. So there is something there, but that doesn't mean that there isn't or are not problems with meetings and the things that we could do better. So why in general do we think they're bad when we do? And the most commonly expressed sentiment about meetings is that they're a waste of time. This meeting's a waste of my time. You've all heard it said, you've all said it yourselves. You get a meeting invite, you look at your calendar in the morning and you go, oh, well, this one's going to be a waste of time. And so that is a big psychological problem. And actually, these kinds of things can be self-fulfilling. If you go into a situation which you believe to be a waste of time, the chances are it will become one for a number of reasons. So how do they waste time? Firstly, they waste time by being seen as unnecessary or actually being unnecessary. Do I really need to be there? Do we need all these people in this room for this thing that could have been covered with an email? And the other part of it can be that even though the meeting was necessary and needed to happen, it wasn't well planned, or it wasn't productive, or it didn't reach a conclusion. So although the need was there for the meeting, it wasn't well conducted. So how can we deal with that a little bit? Is your meeting really necessary? It's a good question, right? Something like 30% of a US workers' week is spent in status meetings. So that means you spend, as an American worker, a third of your time telling other people stuff you already did. And then slightly more worryingly, half of workers report that they spend about as much time in those meetings as they do preparing for them. So now we're at 60% of your time preparing for a status meeting. And this research is done by, I think, Lucid Chart. And unsurprisingly, they're a company that creates a product which is designed to track projects and plan and provide status at a glance for managers. But it is a good point. And the problem is with these kind of meetings is that then 74% of people say they multitask during the meeting. So what does that mean? It means they do other stuff other than pay attention. And that really does then impinge on the productivity of the meeting. So a number of different activities were reported during this quote unquote multitasking, which really means not paying attention. People say they eat lunch, they watch TV, they join other meetings and put them on mute. They respond to work emails and sometimes their own emails. Particular favorite here is the making side comments about the current meeting. Because we're all using Zoom and Teams now and they all have chat functions, we can talk to our friends about how boring the meeting is while we're in the boring meeting. And yes, really, something like 11% of people said they used the bathroom during a meeting. I'm guilty of some of those, not all of them. So how do we deal with this one? Well, first, and might be obvious tip, minimize status meetings. There are lots and lots and lots of tools that track project status. There are lots of ways to track status other than standing or sitting in a group and chewing the fat. But if you need to have a status meeting, have it standing up. There's lots and lots of research that suggests that standing meetings or stand-up meetings are a very effective way of keeping a meeting on track, keeping people engaged. If you're standing around talking, it's actually much harder to be distracted. You can't get your phone out. It's really obvious when you're doing that. And it's just a better way to have a short conversation and guarantee that it's a short conversation. So that's our first bit of advice. Verizon continued their research with looking at some of the reasons that people got frustrated with meetings, or some of the major problems at meetings. And they asked their respondents to rank their top 3 irritants or top 3 problems in a meeting. So the third most common was poor video reception. I guess we could describe that today as bad video quality. 86% of their respondents listed that as the top irritant. Slightly more popular, poor audio reception. So I take this to mean, so poor reception, poor quality of a call, and we can see that is a very, very big deal. And we've always known that to be true. But what's really interesting to me is that the most common complaint was the bad meeting, the badly organized meeting, or the ineffective meeting. It wasn't the quality of the meeting that got the most people innovated. It was the fact that the meeting wasn't well run. So what can we do about that? What makes them so ineffective? What makes them not productive? The main issue around these ineffective meetings or unproductive meetings, apart from all the emailing and TV and trips to the bathroom, is a lack of a clear goal or agenda. And what that does is it feeds the psychology of pointlessness. If you don't have an agenda for a meeting, it's hard to understand what the point of it is. It's hard to believe that it's worth doing. So having that set of clear goals really helps people become more engaged. And so a piece of research was done by somebody else, which basically asked employees how often they left a meeting with a clear understanding of what to do next. Was it productive? So 10%, 9% of people said that they left every meeting with an understanding of what to do next, and a further 45 said most of the time. But that leaves nearly 50% of people who leave meetings without a clear understanding of what to do next, either some or most of the time. And that isn't good, in my opinion. So tip number 2, always have an agenda. Having a clear outcome for any meeting means it can finish, as in we know it has reached its conclusion, which makes it feel like it's got a point, right? If I know that after X, Y, and Z decision is made, this meeting is finished and I can leave, I'm encouraged to help that happen so that I can get on with the rest of my day. It also helps an organizer decide who needs to be there. If you've got a decision to be made, you know who are the decision makers, you know who you need to invite to the meeting, and you also need to know, but it also helps you know who not to invite. And actually lots of organizations recognize this. Many companies, Intel is a prime example, enforce this no agenda, no meeting rule for this very reason, which is if you have an agenda and you know who to invite, you can have your meeting. If you don't have an agenda, people are within their rights to refuse. Another problem that's identified is that the more attendees you have, in general, the less productive a meeting is. And Jeff Bezos is quoted, I'm not sure this is accurate or not, he's quoted as saying that if a team can't be fed with 2 pizzas, then it's too big. I like that. It's a fun statistic. But his point is that with too many cooks in the kitchen or too many people in the room, whichever metaphor you prefer, contributions become diluted. So if we have more people in a meeting, anything that anyone has to say is less likely to be heard. But also the people that are there have fewer chances to be heard because there's more that has to be said, more people want to speak. The opposite of that is also true. In a big meeting, attendees will be less inclined to contribute. They will coast. And that basically means they'll sit there and feel like they don't have to add anything to the conversation because there are other people that will carry them. And then what happens when you're coasting is that you're not engaged. So if you're not fully paying attention because you don't have to, you might be tempted to engage in one of those other activities that we talked about before. So with that in mind, only invite who you need. And that's obviously made easier with an agenda, but it's respectful of people's time. Not inviting them to meetings you don't really need them at. It's respectful of other people's time. We're all busy people. Also, it ensures by having the minimum number of people in the space that you get the most out of the people you do invite. They're going to be more productive. But don't overdo it, don't over trim, because you can't get in a position where you can't reach the conclusion you want to reach because you don't have all the relevant people in the space. So this webinar, as I said, is a few months old, but obviously things have changed in terms of meetings in the last month or so. And so we added some content here. So this is Stop Wasting Time Working From Home edition. And I just want to cover off how this changed or has changed since we started working from home a lot. I've myself been working at home for 3 weeks now. Got a little bit of experience, and I did that for 18 months in a prior position. But here are the here's what we just discussed, but from the context of working at home. And the first thing to say is really the rules haven't changed much. They're just more important. It's more important that you follow these kind of basic rules of meeting hygiene because working from home is tricky. Your meeting still probably isn't necessary. Meetings are hard at home because most people don't have a dedicated I can lock the door, so we've got to work around the family, got to work around other people working at home, got to work around your kids, got to work around the cat. Privacy is a challenge, right? We don't all have the luxury of a den or an office. Some people are working from the kitchen table, some are working in their bedroom, some are working in the living room. And so it's much harder to have a private space, much harder to concentrate. So the barrier, the bar, if you like, for should I invite this person to this meeting needs to be higher in order to be respectful of their needs. And technology is also hard, right? The first time I gave this webinar last week, my router crashed. It's because I'm using a consumer grade internet router from a major US wireless company. It's not up to the task. Sometimes it needs rebooting. It happened to reboot itself during the webinar. So technology is also a problem. We don't have access to all the toys and the bells and whistles we might have at our desks at work. We might be using secondary computers. We might be using poor quality headsets. It's just challenging. And just because people are working from home, it doesn't mean you should book more meetings with them to keep in touch. It's not actually particularly helpful for people to have more meetings when they're trying to work out of their garden. If you want to touch base with team members, hold one-on-one calls with them, have a personal conversation with them, or organize fun activities around the team. I saw a distributor in the UK last week on LinkedIn has organized a Zoom-based cooking session, which I thought was fantastic. It's hilarious. They had 6 or 7 people on a Zoom call and they were all baking cookies together. I thought that was a great team building idea. Keeps everybody in touch, but it's not burdensome and it's not a work thing in particular. It's just a social activity. Great idea. Okay, so second rule. You should still have an agenda. In fact, it's even more important that we have an agenda. More distractions in the house make staying on track even harder than it would normally be, right? It's difficult to pay attention when there are the usual things that you find in the home going on. And an agenda forces people to pay that attention. But it also lets people know they don't need to attend. It gives people permission to make an adult decision to say, you know what, I've seen your agenda, thanks for that. I don't think I have much to add to this meeting. And that's really important these days, is to give people permission to say, you know what, I don't need to be in this call, I don't need to be on this meeting, I've got other things I need to get on with. And again, only invite who you need, and who you need will be driven by the agenda, so you should still have one. So like I said, I've worked from home before, I'm not an expert, but I think that these things help. I found they help. I've read a bunch of research around what helps with working at home. The New York Times wrote a fantastic article 5 or 6 days ago about this topic. So some of these are from that. I'm happy to share that link with people that want it. It's a really good piece about do's and don'ts. The first one fits my message here: have an agenda, have a schedule. And that doesn't mean just for your meetings, it means for your day. It means trying to get up at the same time, trying to be ready at the same time, trying to give yourself breaks, making sure you take lunch, making sure you finish on time. Don't allow your day to sprawl just because you're not in the office, because it can get quite damaging psychologically. If you don't finish working at some point in the day, it sucks. It sucks for your family, it sucks for you. It's difficult to keep your head balanced if you don't have an end to your day, and a middle and a beginning. Second point, think of the children if you have them. They're also going through a tough time. This is difficult. They don't get to see their mates. They don't get to see their teacher. Be patient and be unafraid to push the work to one side for a minute and be a parent if you have kids. Stay in contact. Stay in contact with your friends. Stay in contact with your colleagues. Use Teams, use Zoom, chat, have cookery sessions, share silly pictures of your cats, do whatever. Just be in touch. Don't separate yourself. Even if you're an introvert like me, it doesn't mean you get to not talk to anyone for 3 weeks because you're working at home. That's not good for you. And it's maybe that your friends need someone to talk to too. So try to be present. Have an office if possible. Well, we just talked about how that's not possible for everyone, but I don't really mean convert your shed. I mean, have a space in your house that is the place you're going to work, so that when you don't want to work anymore, you can leave the space. You know, have a physical or not boundary around a place, the desk, whether it is your kitchen table or whether it's the living room or whether it's the office. But then once there's a place you're at work, there's also a place you can not be at work, and you can leave. And that helps with that schedule on that end of the day. Don't be in the space you're working at all day. Have fun. Working at home is different. It's an opportunity to spend time with family a bit more. It's an opportunity to break the routine. So, you know, have fun with it. Wear your pajamas, wear your dressing gown, do what you want to do. Enjoy it. But most of all, be patient. Be patient with your colleagues, be patient with your kid, be patient with your partner, whoever, because you're all stuck in the same house. You've all got things you need to do, and sometimes it's hard. So just think twice. So that's, you know, some words of wisdom. It's all blindingly obvious, or I hope it is. Maybe some of it's useful to you. But let's talk about having the call. So somebody has published a meeting, it's got an agenda, you've decided you need to be in it. But before having a call from home, step one, do you need to be on it? Yes, probably. Step two, test your stuff. Test your headset, test your camera, test your internet connection. Don't use wireless if you can avoid it. These meeting technologies these days are very, very good, Zoom and Teams, but they do not like bandwidth constriction. If you find yourself on bad bandwidths, you'll have bad call quality, you'll get choppy audio, and especially since everyone's all pummeling on Comcast's network right now, watching Netflix, YouTube, streaming lessons, having conference calls, I really recommend using a wired connection, but just test it, make sure it works, have a test call. Or you'll be like me and be halfway through a webinar and your internet connection will die, and that's embarrassing, so don't do that. Place your camera carefully. This is about the office space really, but don't have your camera pointing in a traffic area. Don't have it pointing at the bathroom door. Don't have it pointing at the kitchen. Try to put it so it's facing a wall. That keeps the distractions out of the background. It avoids people feeling like they're being broadcast. And actually it's better for the camera picture if it's got a static target to focus on, such as a wall. It just produces better quality for people trying to see you. Mute by default. What does that mean? That means join a call muted. Lots of calls can be set up to mute attendees by default. But when you're not speaking in an online meeting, I really suggest muting. It helps with the questions from the background. daddy, can you help with this? Or can you help with this? Those kinds of things are distracting. It's not that they shouldn't happen. Of course they should. We're being patient with our colleagues and families, but if you mute your mic, then you don't get the distraction. It doesn't get transmitted to everybody else. So when you're not speaking, mute your mic. If you have something to say, unmute it. Just makes everybody's life a bit easier, improves the clarity of the meeting. And finally, set boundaries. What does that mean? It might mean close the door. It might just mean telling people you're on a call, right? It might just mean letting your family know, hey, I've got a meeting now, so please don't distract me. Because it's not fair to start a meeting, start a call, and then start frantically waving your hands at people when they're making noise. You need to let people know that something's happening so that they can, prepare appropriately or modify behavior or go sit somewhere else. Setting those boundaries, even if it's sticking a post-it note on the table, just helps everybody feel a bit more comfortable. So that's working at home edition. We talked a lot about behaviors. We've talked a bit about psychology. We've talked a bit about statistics. But as we all know, as AV professionals, behaviors are not the only things that can make meetings ineffective. So what else makes meetings ineffective? It's not just a lack of agenda. It could be not sticking to it, right? It could be a late start. If an hour-long meeting starts 5 minutes late, that's nearly 10% of its productive time out the window. And most meetings aren't an hour long, so we're already over 10%. Running late actually has another impact, which is that it frustrates attendees who are ready to go. So if everybody's sitting, waiting, ready, and there's one or two people who are not, the people who are ready tend to get upset and into a negative mindset, and that can have an impact on the productivity of the meeting. So late starts can happen when people are late. They can happen when the previous meeting is late, but they can also happen when technology is late. And technology late could be that it's not working, could be that people don't understand how to use it. But in general, technology-linked problems can cause stress for attendees. Technology, when it doesn't go well, can be stressful. It can upset people. Technology is hugely important to us. It has a huge impact on the quality of a meeting. Great technology can make a good meeting fantastic. But bad technology can make a bad meeting really awful, right? If you're having a bad day and you're not getting what you want out of your boss and the presentation isn't going well, and then the screen fails, that can it's a spiral, right? It's a downward spiral, and it can be an upward spiral. If your presentation is awesome, your message is getting across, everything's working, it's a great feeling, that's uplifted by good technology. But back on the conference call, in the average 38-minute call, we spent 8 minutes getting started, 13 minutes on distractions, and actually 17 minutes on being productive, which is pretty shocking. So less than half of the average call is a productive period of time. And technology-related stuff can account for up to 7 of those 21 minutes of non-related time. So a third of the wasted time can be directly or indirectly attributed to technology problems. But that's a big deal. And the reason it's a big deal is that people fundamentally expect technology to solve problems, not introduce problems. 83% of the American workforce say they depend on technology to collaborate. It's essential to their work. And the majority are believers in technology. They believe that access to the right technology and the right tools will reduce stress and make them more productive. And this psychology of expectation is the reason, the number one reason that bad technology makes people so angry. It makes them angry because they're let down and they're disappointed, right? Their dreams of this utopian future where all the technology work are crushed, and they get mad, really mad. You hear words like, how can this be so complicated? I just want to get the picture on the screen. I just want to do this. The expectation is there that the tech is going to work. So when it doesn't, it's doubly frustrating. It's frustrating because it isn't working, and it's frustrating because you expected it to work in the first place. So promised some solutions. So there's a little bit here from Bive about technology solutions, but let's talk a little bit about the right technology. So people were asked in the same piece of research which technologies would help them make their meetings more effective. They were asked their opinion. This isn't based on knowledge that it would work. It's back to this expectation again. What do you think would help you? And so here are some results. There were some options provided. 50% of people want technology that works with the touch of a button. Nearly 45% of people said they wanted wireless technology. They felt that would help them. 45% of people wanted sharing from any device, and 40% want easy remote conferences with colleagues. So I don't think anyone would disagree with those things as being efficiency improvers. But also remember that something like, well, 2 out of 3 of our top irritants were tech related, right? So 88% of people felt like poor audio quality was an irritant, and 86% poor video quality. So having this technology available and improving on what the current situation is a way to make people feel better about their meetings and hopefully make them more productive. So let's go back to getting started on time for a second. Figuring out how to get that going really is, or was, a user experience problem. And the good news is that most of the UC vendors, Zoom and Teams and GoToMeeting and whoever, have done a pretty decent job of the one button start. Microsoft Teams famously had the 1 second meeting start mantra when they were developing the software, the UI for Teams rooms. And, you know, give or take, they've pretty much hit that. So the challenge now is not getting started, right? That's been solved for the most part by the UC vendors. They have large resources, they have big UX teams, they've done a lot of work on, okay, how can we make it easy to get going? The challenge now is not starting, it's getting stuff done. So we hear a lot of complaint about sharing content. The share button in Teams is still confusing to people. It's definitely confusing to some people in Zoom. It's not as simple as it could be. And I actually think the current situation where lots and lots of people who have never used Zoom and Teams before are now being asked to use Zoom and Teams is exposing some flaws in the user experience. My parents, both retired, are both using Zoom for the first time in the last week, and they found it very confusing. They also found Teams confusing, and they also find FaceTime confusing, but the point is that it's not as immediately intuitive as we'd like to believe. So that's a challenge. And what about when there is no call? Lots of meeting rooms using these UC platforms assume there is a meeting. They assume that there's some kind of conference call going on. So even when you're in the room with nobody at the far end, they're built around the premise that there's going to be some kind of scheduled meeting that the device in the room can participate in. But if you don't do that, if you want a spontaneous meeting and you haven't booked a Teams meeting, how do we get around that? What's the solution? So I'm going to spend a little time talking about products from a company called HRT, announced that we acquired in February. And they had a lot of interesting ideas around how to solve the problems I just described, which is one of the reasons that we invited them to join the family. So they have a great story around wireless meetings. I want to talk through that a little bit. Before I do that, yes, Deval asked, are we recording? Yes, the meeting's being recorded, and the recording will be shared after the fact. So HRT has a family called Huddle Hub. Had the Huddle Hub 1 and Huddle Hub 1 Plus products, very similar devices, and both of them are intended to solve problems in the BYOD, bring your own device, huddle space. So typical Huddle Room, what's it got? It's got a display, it's got a small amount of AV equipment of some kind, and then we've got a user who is going to bring in a laptop or some kind of compute device with them. We're assuming there's no resident device here. So how do we join these things up and make them work? The first thing to do is we use wired system, right? So a wired Huddle Room. So our display is connected via HDMI, our laptop connected over USB, and that's how we do it, right? So there's a number of solutions for that. People have come up with dongles. We've got a variety of connectors. There's this whole mess that goes on with the squid, right? Which connector do I need for this laptop? Have I got a bunch of them in the table? Have I got the right adapter? I've got my HDMI adapter, my DisplayPort adapter, my USB-C adapter. Maybe I've got a wireless dongle, which isn't really wireless because it's still got a dongle on it. These are the solutions today, or that were around, and HRT Huddle Hub basically says, you know what, we can do a little bit better. So they have this idea of the wireless Huddle Room. And in this case, we take a Huddle Hub, and connect all of our in-room peripherals, the HDMI cable, the USB cable to that device, and then our visitor, our meeting attendee, connect wirelessly. So now I don't need any cable, I don't need any dongles for the user, and I get two pieces of important functionality. The first thing I get is wireless access to the USB accessories, and the second thing I get is wireless sharing of my content back into the room. So I can on the left-hand side, have a conference call running on my laptop, whatever platform I want, and make use of the room's installed AV equipment. So there could be a webcam, could be microphone, speakers, audio equipment to join a call, and then have a room full of people be present. And or both, I can be sharing in a meeting which isn't a conference call. I can just be having people in my room, in my Huddle Room, and now I can wirelessly share my content via the Huddle Hub to a display system. So with wireless USB, which is the kind of the core of what Huddle Hub does, you no longer need a cable from your UC soft codec to your AV equipment. So wherever that codec lives, in a laptop, in a resident machine, you don't need to wire it up. You get wireless access to the USB peripherals. And for Byant, that's particularly exciting when we think about some of the USB-enabled AV equipment that we have today. Devio is a fantastic example here. I can connect to Devio. It's now a wirelessly available speakerphone for any UC codec on a laptop. So how does that work? Essentially, you're going to plug all the USB devices into the back of your Huddle Hub. You can actually, there's one USB 3 port, but you can add more devices by using a hub. And the really clever thing is that Devio itself is already a USB hub. So that single USB connection there could be to your Devio, and then your Devio could be connected to a webcam or whatever else. All of those USB 3.0 accessories are available to whoever connects wirelessly to that hub. And how that works is that there are some drivers for Huddle Hub that need installing on the compute device, but once you've installed the drivers in the UC soft codec, whatever it is, whether it's Teams or Zoom, GoToMeeting, you can select Huddle Hub as a device. So you can go and select your microphone and choose Huddle Hub. You go and select your loudspeakers in your operating system audio settings and choose Huddle Hub, and then you can connect the camera as well and choose Huddle Hub. So now Huddle Hub is the virtual device for all of those USB accessories, and your computer or codec host is using Huddle Hub as a proxy for all of those wireless devices. Okay, so more information. This is not meant to be a big pitch on HRT. I wanted to position it as a solution to some of the problems we outlined, rather than this being a big product webinar. There will be one of those in the coming months. We've got plenty more webinars lined up. In the meantime, if you want to learn a bit more about HRT and the products that Byant's now got, please visit the website. It's hrt.website for more information there. Please also contact support. The support teams are now pretty well fully integrated. Product management teams are well integrated. So if you have questions about HRT and how it works and what it can do, please address those in the questions box now, or address them to support@byant.com. Teams ready and willing to help. So now I'll thank you very much for coming and open up for any questions. Okay, well, it doesn't seem like there's any questions this morning. Slightly lower number than those who attended. If you tried to attend last week and didn't manage to because of my connection problems, I thank you for your patience. Thanks for joining us again this morning. As I say, the recording will be available via email shortly, along with the slides, and then it will be posted to the Byant YouTube channel in the not too distant future. So I wish you all a good day. Thanks for coming.